You talk a lot in your show about having one foot in British society and one foot out of it. I've always felt like an outsider. I was always the white guy in Malaysia where he lived until 2006, and then the Chinese guy in the UK. I think that sort of thing is quite common in comedy, not quite belonging. What was it like to finally find something to belong to? Well, the comedy community is really the only one I've truly felt part of. It transcends culture and race and background. We're all connected by what we do. I find that bond is stronger than any other I have. I think this millennial generation of comics is a particularly supportive one. That's not to say we always have the right approach to things, but it's very compassionate. We're always seeing what each other are doing. How did you get into comedy? When I was 18, I just wanted to show people how clever I thought I was. I did it to show the popular kids in school that I was worth something. So the reasons I got into it were quite shallow, but that fell away when I learned to love the form itself. You say that you feel a level of patriotism towards Britain, but that it's a very dysfunctional country when it comes to race. I say that I enjoy a level of patriotism that only immigrants can really have, as we have the objectivity of living elsewhere. That's the crux of it. But the conversation that we have about race in this country is pushed to absurdity, as it's always taken to extremes. The moderate opinion, which is usually the most prevalent one, isn't heard as much. It's the more extreme voices that are allowed to be heard, and that makes moderates feel uneasy about discussing it. And you say things are very different in Malaysia. The more extreme voices aren't heard so much there, as people talk about race all the time quite openly, so you don't have that pressure cooker effect like in Britain. I think the internet has exacerbated the problem. Moderate viewpoints don't get retweeted, the more sensational ones do. Moderate opinions are boring, so they don't get read. That propagates an illusion that extreme views are the majority, when they're probably not. I've always felt like an outsider. Phil Wang at the Edinburgh Festival. Photograph Murdo MacLeod for The Guardian. What is it that makes you feel patriotic about Britain? I truly think it's one of the great bastions of liberal thought in the world. We forget how left-wing Britain is, objectively speaking. If you compare the Republican Party to our conservatives, they look like hippies. You don't even have to go as far as the US to see the far right doing well. Like France and Holland, I'm proud that candidates of far-right parties would never be the second choice in Britain like they were there. It was close, those guys nearly became the leaders of those countries. Also, I was an engineering student, and the quality of the stuff we do here. Do you have a favorite bit of British engineering? Well, the Industrial Revolution, although you could argue that it's had negative impacts as well, like global warming and depletion of natural resources. Actually, the first camera phone was invented at Edinburgh University, so we have them to blame for the selfie. Did you always want to do outward-looking comedy that touched on big subjects? My mantra with comedy has always been that funny comes first. Something has to be funny from the offset for me to think about doing something with it. But I've become more confident about my performing and writing, so I'm trying to talk about more interesting ideas and being funny within those ideas. It's especially important with hour-long shows. I've had problems keeping people's attention for a whole hour, but I find it much easier when people actually want to listen on their own merit. Then the jokes are there to make sure people don't get angry or uncomfortable. I have a lot more to say on these subjects, but I omitted them from the show as they weren't funny enough. Are there any particular comedians who do interesting and funny who you look up to? Louis C.K., definitely, and Patrice O'Neill is very controversial, but he's so engaging and funny too. You really pay attention with him and mull over his opinions. Do you want people to leave your show mulling over your opinions a little more now? I always just wanted to entertain. This is the first time I've talked about things I'm really passionate about, reading around it, researching, trying to temper my own opinions. I'm not looking to change people's minds at all. I just think we get carried away with our own image of ourselves and which camp we fit into. Instead of challenging our own opinions, you just subscribe to whatever the left or right thinks. I get that though people are busy, they have jobs I don't. I sometimes think that as a stand-up, people are outsourcing their personal thinking time to us. What's been your worst ever gig as a stand-up? At the Brown Cow Festival, I think it was called, in Essex. There was a big cabaret lineup, and I was the only comedian on the bill. I had to do 10 minutes at 1 a.m., then another 10 minutes at 2 a.m. By then it was the only place open in the whole festival, so every drunk person was there, pissed and totally uninterested in me. I had to follow a burlesque stripper act who got down as far as nipple tassels. Then the MC went on and said, and now, a comedian. I went out there and I was performing to a sea of angry boners. They just turned off completely. In the end I had to go with it. I took my shirt off and ran my naked breasts along the front row, got them to motorboat me. One guy tried to tweak my nipple, but I dodged him just in time. Then I had to do it all again at 2 a.m. You didn't consider a move into burlesque. There was genuine passion for what I did, but I don't think it's in my skill set, no.